Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks for taking your time to come here. I posted this on Facebook, and I had 3 old friends that said, "Boy, good luck. I'd love to be there, but I'm going to be at Valhalla at the PGA Championship." So good luck. But it's a great weather day, and it's been raining all week, and so it's exciting. I'll fill our golf lovers in later. So thank you very much, Amy and Todd and Susan Weddle and Mark for the introduction and for having us here to talk about, having me here to talk about some matters that I've done a lot of research with, and some things that I'll share will be things I've done in the Evansville area, but then some of the work I did with Hope 6 will touch on some projects here. So a lot of this book covers 15 plus years of work I've done in neighborhood community development and housing and urban issues. So before we talk about community oh, by the way, my book is for sale. If you guys, I only have 3 copies. If you want to buy one, come see me afterwards. But it is available on Amazon. Just type in the title, Amazon, and some of those other .coms, and you can and some of those kind of price points are different than what you would get it from the publisher. So it's readily available. But if you want one now, let me know. And so this is what we'll be talking a lot about, what I touch upon in my book. But before we sort of talk about community development, it's important to talk about what community is. And our friend Wendell Berry, who I believe he's 91 years old, I think, is one of our, he has a reputation for being more sort of understanding about the environment and sort of those sorts of values, but he is a very strong communitarian. And he defines community as the mental and spiritual condition of knowing that the place, so it's important we talk about place, is shared, and that the people who share the place define and limit the possibilities of each other's lives. That includes people's knowledge, concern, and trust in each other. So it's about shared space, it's about commonalities. That's where we have that word community in. And we have formed communities based on people interacting with each other, meeting basic needs, protecting and enhancing individual self-interest. That we are all guided by this principle of rational choice, where we want to maximize our utility, and we want to be around people who have similar interests, and we want to protect our own interests as well as work with be with people that are like us as well. But also, people join and form communities because they feel safe, they feel healthy, and they're more satisfied than being alone. And there's that social capital element I'll talk about, that people, their lives are enriched because they're in community. Being with like-minded people, learning new things from growing, feeling this sense of belonging, these connections, this support. This is all about what you receive when you're in community. It's not just sort of an artificial thing. There's benefits, desired benefits that come out of being in community. And we do these in many ways. We have intentional communities. So many of you probably heard of the Shakers. They're intentional in that they devote their lives and their livelihoods towards the good of that community. But you can be in community for just being a part of something that you believe is bigger than yourself, or that you have these sort of common interests. So there's a couple great definitions. There's many different ways you can look at community. If you're taking, what I do in public administration and political science and a lot of things is very interdisciplinary. So if you believe in interdisciplinarity, you're going to obviously have more than one definition about a number of things. Community and community development are no different. When we talk about community, people look at it from a unified body of individuals. And it can be a common space, place, or location. And it doesn't necessarily have to be physical or spatial anymore. It can be virtual. You could create community on the World Wide Web and social media. And we have had that. And that's what makes us understanding community and even rethinking community very critical at this time in our history, because we have done that. And we have done that in the last couple of years with the COVID-19 pandemic, et cetera. Sometimes people come together, there's something about a problem or issue that might transcend. So to segue into community development, people come together because there's a problem and need in their community and they want it fixed, or they want it changed. And so people come together. John Dewey talked about the idea of self-realization, that I can be in community with like-minded people that share my interest, who perhaps put me in a situation where I can improve myself, improve oneself as a social being, as an individual, in achieving one's needs and one's ends while improving the community at the same time. So there's many definitions to talk about of what community is, of just, it is about common interests, it's about common space, common place, but also sharing things in common that you can also use towards improving something, improving oneself, improving the community that you live in and serve. And so this kind of goes into what we talk about community development. And it's been interesting. I don't, this has kind of been a little bit of evolution in my last couple of years where I've been connected with, at the University of Southern Indiana, the Center for Communal Studies. And so there's a connection with this town. Have you ever heard of New Harmony?
Yeah.
Okay, New Harmony is, as we, at USI where I work, we have a special relationship in that we had a partnership with the Indiana State Museums and our organization, and we created this thing called Historic New Harmony. And we're responsible for managing over 24 properties at New Harmony. So we see this as sort of a laboratory, a classroom of preserving New Harmony. And New Harmony, if you ever get a chance, it's about 2.5 hours away. It's wonderful because the thing about New Harmony is it sees itself as sort of this innovative, forward-thinking town. And its belief was based upon this notion of creating a utopia. And part of utopia is always striving for it, but always trying to be the best versions of ourselves. And that's what happens when you try to reimagine in your community. You're trying to make it the best that you want it to be. You engage, and a great definition, these two I have here, is you're initiating in a social action process to change everything about your community, your economic, social, cultural, and environmental situation. To imagine it the best way you possibly can see it. Another definition we have is asset building that improves the quality of life. So what are some of those assets that a community has that can improve if there's access to technology or resources or social and human capital? Those are things that can be built upon to improve the quality of life. Because that's a fundamental aspect of community development. What can we do to improve and enhance the quality of life of the communities we live in? And there's ways we can go about doing that. But another way we can enhance that quality of life is through social capital. I'm glad Mark talked about Robert Putnam. He's a Harvard professor. He's probably long retired, but he's kind of the grand poobah grandfather of the social capital movement. So social capital is this focuses on relationships and networks and the benefits that derive from those relationships. And you can have various levels of social capital. A lot of that depends upon the connections that are made. And he talks about high levels of social capital resulting from these community and voluntary associations. So maybe we don't use the word voluntary, but that's a term that Alexis de Tocqueville used when he wrote his Democracy in America in the 1830s. And in many ways, maybe Putnam springboards from that. But Alexis de Tocqueville came here to study our prison systems, and he was just amazed, just 40, 50 plus years into this American Republic experiment, how involved Americans were. They were involved, they were connected, and they were connected through these voluntary associations. The state isn't making you involved, there's no mandate. You're going and you're getting involved in these groups, whether they're neighborhood associations, block watch groups, sewing circles, bowling leagues, and he uses the bowling alone because we're seeing a decline in this social capital. We're seeing decline in participation in these voluntary associations and organizations. And that has become the sort of the sauce of American civic and public life. We join, we belong, and we belong because as human beings, we have this need for community, as I just mentioned. The need to be with people who are like us, the need to feel a sense of belonging. Not always a sense of purpose, but a sense of belonging, a sense of I feel I'm a part of something. And then you take a step further to community development, I'm a part of something to take change and make change in my community to improve and enhance the quality of life of the community we live in.
Professor, you want questions at the end or after?
We could carry on, maybe at the end, that's okay. And so you see these sorts of levels of participation among political and religious activities. I mean, if you have a question, that's fine. I mean,
well, I was curious if
I guess we can have questions. That's fine.
I was once upon a time in grad school in the 90s, and the emerging democracies of Eastern Europe, and once upon a time Russia, believe it or not. This was like all the rage, it seemed like. This is what they wanted, that they didn't have under the Soviet-style regimes. And now, what, people in the West aren't doing it?
And a lot of that has to do, as Putnam talks about, is the decline of the rise of technology, that the suburbanization has been a cause, that we're siloing ourselves. And then not only just technology, when he was writing it in 2000, we didn't quite have the social media framework, but now we've siloed ourselves into these echo chambers, and that thus creating a very hard-headed, kind of, if you will, civic ecosystem, where you have folks that are, you know, we could talk about political, I mean, they're gonna be 40% of the population who you're not gonna convince them otherwise.
Yeah, I'm just
of
curious.
one side or the
has
other.
it kept pace in that part of the world, you know, because they, at these conferences and everything, I was in sociology at the time, it was, we want every kind of trade union, we want every kind of church, we want every kind of voluntary bowling league and everything else, because none of that was allowed without a government sanction.
I think you know, sometimes it's what we call these habits of the heart. We do these things and they come there naturally to us. I think some of these other European democracies maybe don't quite have that because we have sort of a head start. But then you're seeing an erosion of that among the European communities, because you're seeing, yeah, maybe some of you, we don't report on this very well in the United States, but if you are reading The Economist and some others, you do see European democracies, they're being threatened by this hard reactionary right politics that, of course, we see every day. So, you know, it's just a different kind of approach that, not ideal, but it is kind of an interesting thing you say about the topic, because they're learning from us, and we probably have a lot to learn from them as well. So when we talk about social capital, there's these different kinds of social capital. There's the bonding social capital. That's going to be the strengths and ties you have with family or close friends in your same social circle. But then you also have the bridging social capital. So this refers to ties between social groups, social class, and different religious and ethnic groups. And then the linking social capital, Will Cockles, this theorist, who sort of came up with this idea of linking people to voluntary organizations, and that's extremely important. Bridging and linking do have some overlaps too, but it's these ties that people have that could that sort of make up the strength of a particular community. And low levels of social capital on all these levels mean that a lot of your community will cease to be or will deteriorate. There's a great book, I could share this, maybe you heard it or not. It's called Why the Garden Club Couldn't Save Youngstown. And it was written by a political scientist, Sean Safford. He's in a European university now, but he studied why did Youngstown, Ohio, this is one of those mid-industrial post cities, why did they decline and yet other cities didn't? And he studied, and what we came up with, and he actually compared Youngstown to Allentown, Pennsylvania. These are old steel towns, blue collar to the core. And noticed that Youngstown declined because of its low levels of social capital, that all the disparate groups weren't connecting. And he saw higher levels of connections in Allentown. So these sorts of low levels, when you have this low bridging social capital, when you have all of this, and it's low levels, then you don't have a connection with things. And, you know, I'm not seeing a study on Louisville, but a lot of you kind of know and live here. There's a lot of different Louisvilles. In there, you can ask 10 different groups, and they'll give you 10 different definitions of this community. And that might have to do with, in many ways, of how they see their government and how they see the society work with them. But a lot of it might just be these groups, you know, in the greater civic ecosystem may not always be as connected. And you'll see it in a lot of places. I would suspect that it would be interesting to sort of look at if Louisville, I have not seen that. I'm just kind of measuring sort of social capital. Now, having social capital is very good, because when you have high levels, when it comes to times of crisis, people can benefit from these relationships and networks in terms of resource availability, transferring information, resources, and knowledge. So social networks are critical for the survival of communities. When it was diminished and deteriorated in Youngstown, the community suffered. And maybe some of you heard of Youngstown. I think Youngstown was known to have some politicians who had been involved in a lot of corruption and scandal, and so you have a void where you take advantage of the system. But these kinds of things are critical, and Putnam talks about low levels of social capital. You see the decline in a lot of these cities and communities. Now, I touch about kind of these approaches we have to community development when we want to improve and enhance the quality of life of our community. And there's three sort of themes I talk about: self-help, technical assistance, and conflict. So the self-help model is what it implies. It's having communities help themselves. Now, it doesn't start completely from nothing. You're not totally helpless, that you are involving someone who is a facilitator who adopts a relatively neutral position. And these folks are more about process and capacity building. How do we build the capacity of the people we work with? And that's a lot of times in terms of leadership development, skill development. And they're more focused on that than the results. And there's some people come in and want to improve their community, and they want that fancy shiny building, right? I mean, politicians want that. We want that nice thing that looks good, and that's fine, because especially if it serves a useful purpose. But those who kind of are self-help, they want the community to help themselves. They want to be in a position where the community themselves comes up with the idea, and obviously a facilitator helps them get to a place where they come up with it themselves. And this is a little bit different than the technical assistance model. So this model is rooted in, we just don't have enough information. We don't know what's going on. So we bring in the experts to come in and tell us what we need for our community, please. You are the big hotshot architects and planners and engineers and all that. Please tell us. But a lot of times these advocates are used, and they often work for the community rather than with the community. Those in the self-help model work with the community, where the community drives it. But they're all more about the technical problem solving. Okay, we need to find a way to solve our homelessness problem. So we'll build a shelter, we'll build some information systems management software so we know where the homeless are. The self-help would be ways we can do to build capacity so that we don't have homeless anymore. People are put in a position of self-sufficiency, etc. So there's an interesting sort of a story. When I was at U of L for graduate school, I was involved in an international service learning program. And this program at the time has expanded to many countries, but we were in Belize, and a lot of it was through relationships that had been built by faculty in the education department. The guy who ran it was Dr. Bernie Stronecki, who's been retired for a while. But through the connections we made, it was a great experience, because you had all these different disciplines at U of L who were coming to Belize to do work on projects of a number of things. It could be advising the courts and criminal justice system, work with the community on any sort of medical and health needs. But the fundamental question that was always asked is, what can we do to improve and enhance the life of your community? And one year the question was posed to this little village we worked with called Gales Point. And Gales Point's off the map, and it was decimated by Hurricane Hattie in the 60s. And you come in, you try to defer judgment and keep things sort of your judgments aside, but you come in thinking, oh wow, they could use this, they could use that. But the community and the mayor at the time said, we want a women's softball team. Okay. So that was what they wanted, so they worked, and the sports and PE department at U of L worked on creating a curriculum, creating a plan, creating resources to learn how to design a ball field, maintain fields, learn the techniques and skills of building how to play softball. And so all this over time was created. And one of the visits, and it happened to be, so it started years before I was involved, but one of the years I went, they challenged us to a softball game, and the young women beat us, beat the U of L crowds. Yeah, we gave them the tools because that's what they wanted. And we can't assume in community development that we know what the community wants. And so a self-help model just assumes a lot of the technical assistance is, we know, we got you. We know what's best for y'all. Now there's the third one that's conflict, and this is sort of based upon this lack of power. So the individual is oppressed and powerless. So sort of this normative, sort of what we ought to do, emphasis on justice. And so the facilitator isn't about building capacity or about providing technical assistance. It's about being an organizer and an advocate. So the whole Saul Alinsky school, right? So if you probably have heard of Rules for Radicals, this is this organizer. It's trying to address a problem and organize the community around a problem. Winnable wins. Anybody here familiar with Clout? Citizens of Louisville organized. Okay, so some of you have some of the churches you belong to. Clout uses the conflict community development model. A lot of that comes from the DART network. So the DART network takes its, it's consumed the Saul Alinsky Kool-Aid a little bit. And so, fine. If for readers you don't know about the Clout, what we'll do is they'll have a community problems assembly. They'll get organizers around a problem, coalesce a coalition of churches to come together, and then demand action from those that are in power. And it can be controversial because there's some who find the tactics of this DART method that Clout uses, this conflict method, to be somewhat confrontational. And it's hard to kind of exercise change when you use this approach, but it's an approach that has been effective. But there's other means of court of doing it, but besides saying, hey, will you promise that you will fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund? As one example that they did many years ago. So someone who practices community development just knows what's going on. They're good practitioners. They're good observers. They plan with people, not for them. They build leadership skills. They build capacity, and then they graciously withdraw as their group becomes self-directed. Here's another great book called The Flower Man. This is Community Development 101. It's a picture book that illustrates a lot of this. I learned this from a leadership group I belong to. And so there's this guy who walks in, and he just comes to a community, and he's an old man with this bag on his back. And he comes in, and it's kind of, the illustrations are black and white before they become color. Oh, wow. And it's pretty cool because he walks in, moves into this neighborhood, and then his actions brighten up the neighborhood, and then he inspires others to brighten it up. And then they take action, and then when everything has it, you see at the end of the book the old man walking away. So that's a good thing. Our work is done, and we can withdraw as that group becomes self-directed. So they don't have to rely on someone being there for decades to be, what should we do about our community? What should we do? It's self-directed. If done appropriately, it's done with that. And those models, you kind of can have some, at least sort of the self-help and technical assistance sort of combined. So at USI, we kind of came up with this model that we called it the ACT model, the Adaptive Collaborative Community Transformation Model. And this involves several things. Coming together, we have this thing called a pre-initiative. So if a community is like, okay, we want to improve and enhance the quality of life of our community, it's finding somebody who it's this organization or individual that demonstrates interest, okay? So you're not going to a community saying, okay, Russell, we know you need something. No, it's the individual organization or community or neighborhood. They want it, they're initiating it. And oftentimes you have a willing local convener or leader, someone indigenous to that community or neighborhood, who's willing to be that quote unquote buzzing bee. Someone who just excites and empowers. And then they help build this informal support of volunteers who may have specific skills that want to see this community improved and enhanced. Now, you have to know what you're doing, so you sometimes conduct an assessment, and you have trainings, and a lot of times the technical assistance can be helpful in that you can have universities come and provide training, study ethnographic training, and we have folks who study communication, cultural communication, who do that, or any kind of folks to kind of help you understand. But it's driven by this community in mind. Yeah.
I'm so sorry, real quick. The slide before, I love that you put the word willing in there, because I would think that the whole concept of a leader, everybody would want to do it. When you say willing, it's almost like, they're having to do something that most may not want to do.
Right.
So then you really get somebody that's really going to take charge of it.
And they're passionate about it. There isn't any reluctance. There's that's right. I use that buzzing bee, because somebody who has a passion and enthusiasm and for wanting to do this kind of work and wanting to take the time and effort to connect the community. So yeah. And oftentimes you have a steering committee that will formalize. So this buzzing bee, this convener, will meet with community leaders and residents and formalize a structure to make it happen. But once they get all that going, there are these pre-consults, these listening sessions that happen in our community discussion. So the pre-consult, and I know I'm going through this, what could be a year's process in a few minutes, but it's a community defining what the problem might be in the community. And there's this interesting sort of facilitation method called Simplex. And if some of you worked in organizational consulting or other, maybe you've heard of Simplex or not, but it's an involved kind of finding problem definition, where you understand the problem, come up with solutions, and then implement the solutions. And you do this through a very sort of deliberate listening session. And then after you kind of come up with sort of what, and they use this sort of diversion convergence kind of model where we converge sort of ideas that we come up with in sort of a list. So you could have hundreds of ideas and you still have to sort of narrow them down in some of the best ones. But while you're doing that, you also do a SWOT analysis. So what are your organization or community strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? So what are the things your community's good at? What aren't they good at? And then what are some opportunities that we can use? And maybe what you do is, if you see you could use things where you could take the strengths and you can leverage opportunities based on your strengths, or you could take strengths that maybe you can minimize threats, or you take advantage of an opportunity to minimize threats. So these four, kind of in a 2x2 matrix, can converge and interact with each other. But a community also will develop a vision and a mission. So we hear mission and vision statements. So a vision is a statement that transforms an organization or community and provides a picture of what that community could be. What does that look like? What do we want the Highlands to look like? What do we want Russell to look like? But a mission is kind of a general purpose of an organization or community that tells everybody what it is and how it operates. The vision is sort of a grander sort of picture of what could be possible. Mission sort of gets more general, but fits into what the organization is, what the community is, and how it operates. Now, sometimes when we come to these discussions, especially with the Simplex model, you want to develop goals and objectives and strategies. And sort of as you're doing strategic mapping based upon your mission and vision, you come to these how might we questions. How might we do this? How might we achieve this? And sometimes after you map out the problems, the goals themselves are emerged. And so you'll have a process where you identify, okay, what are some of the things that we can do to accomplish our vision and mission, right? And so I know I'm a little wordy on this one, but this is kind of the breakdown when you do strategic planning and kind of the goals, objectives, and strategies. So a goal is this statement that describes what your organization, and this can be interchangeable with community, it's sort of what you want to do, what you want to accomplish. And the fundamental thing about a goal is it's articulating a desired future state. So what do we see ourselves in the future being? How do we want to get there? And the objectives and strategies help get us there because they're directly linked to our goals, reflecting what's happening. So you have a goal, and then you'll have objectives, and then you'll have strategies, and then you'll have metrics that you'll use to be able to measure what those strategies are. So how do you take the goal and how do you put that and implement the goals of your strategic plan, your strategic approach? So when you've come up with these goals, and you begin to, maybe you're not doing the objectives and strategies immediately, at least you got the goals. I put this in here to kind of distinguish the three. That once you've identified these goals, you want to find, and you establish priority teams around those goals. But you also want to identify those people who are going to be those willing, we talk about local drivers, that will own the goals. There's nothing worse about having a strategic plan or a neighborhood plan that you do and you put it on the shelf. And that happens a lot of times in strategic planning, where you do it, oh, we feel great, and then we're not really truly implementing it because we don't have people in the community, neighborhood, or organization who are saying, I own that. We're going to do that. I'll take that. Now, the convener and facilitator can help with that, and a very strong, effective facilitator can carry on and be that willing driver. And then, in relation to this discussions, a lot of surveys and focus groups can happen in order to do an effective community needs assessment. And so, working with universities, a lot of times communities will call upon a university to do focus groups and surveys to be, okay, what was the process like? What are some things that you still need? And kind of working in parallel, right? Et cetera. So these priority teams are these goals are very critical because you need somebody that owns it, that's the person who is going to do it. And that person, that's what makes it a very skilled facilitator, that said they can, in the process, identify the people they want to carry out those goals. I was fortunate enough, one of the, did anybody have any questions before I continue? When one of my first people I met, I was interviewed, I've been at USI for 14 years. And one of the first people I met was a woman named Sue Elsperman. And Sue Elsperman has got a PhD at Speed School at U of L, who was an industrial engineer by trade, who did consulting. And a lot of these communities we worked with were done by Sue Elsperman's work in facilitating. And she was able to use this facilitation and working with companies and organizations and industries and extrapolate that to communities and neighborhoods. So the two communities I talk about in depth, Jacobsville and Glenwood, some of that had a lot to do with her and her team engaged in the facilitation process. So it takes a very skilled facilitator to be able to understand what a community needs, to be able to identify those people that are going to be a part of your committee working with this convener, but then the person that after a while owns those goals. Incidentally enough, the Sue Elsperman ended up getting elected to the state legislature, and in 2 years' time was picked to be Mike Pence's running mate for Indiana governor in 2012. Now, she was dropped from the ticket upon his reelection, and then we know 3 months later he was tapped to be Trump's vice president. But her soft landing as a result of that became president of Ivy Tech Community College of Indiana, where in many ways a lot of this method that we've used, that she's used, that we sort of did this, and a lot of this was perfected when she was working and founded the USI Center for Applied Research. So a lot of that work, I was happy to meet her when I first came, and she did a lot of that work the first couple of years before she left to go. So these are the communities we work with. One of these is the Jacobsville neighborhood, and this is a map of Evansville, and this is sort of the inner city. Anybody ever been to Evansville before?
Yeah.
Okay, Evansville is sort of, Mark Twain had that quote, "I want to die in Kentucky because everything happens 20 years later." Well, sometimes I apply this to Evansville. It's like, I want to die in Evansville because everything happens 20 years after Kentucky. So right now, Evansville's realizing what it could do for its waterfront. Right? That's so 1999 for us, right here. Hey. Evansville's a wonderful community, but this is an area called Jacobsville, around Jacobsville, where this process that through simplex training, through facilitation, came towards a comprehensive community development effort. And this is the boundary. And so after doing some of the community needs assessment and understanding what was needed, one thing that kind of emerged from this was the need for better support for young people, better education outcomes. And so there's an organization that became one of the, maybe not the convener, but certainly a buzzing bee and a partner, named the Dream Center. And the Dream Center, while has a religious sort of orientation to it, but it really saw itself as really trying to improve the neighborhood around it. This area, it's a little bit more expansive than this, but more or less a main street. But I will say the zone's a little bit bigger than this, but this is sort of gives you an idea of sort of the center of this all. Is that they created a 12-block radius, what they called the Jacobsville Children's Zone. And one of the things they committed to was this sort of cradle to career model where you track students and work with them from the moment they're born to the moment they graduate. And that's based on a model that they derived, and a lot of the research came from what was going on in Harlem with the Harlem Children's Zone, where maybe some of you heard that, where it took a 97 blocks of all of Harlem and it became a zone. And a student who was born in Harlem, they wanted to see those students, if they were born and they stayed in Harlem, to become college graduates. Now, that has had a lot of publicity, and so that was applied to this, and was also applied to a similar model. The churches sort of overlap and talk. This is with Audubon Kids Zone, which is applied to the east end of Henderson, Kentucky, which is across the river from Evansville. And so I was able to get sort of these 5 goals, so a similar process. And there's one other church that kind of, actually the overarching church that kind of has been a convener. This is a church called One Life. And they of course were connected to Jacobsville and connected to the east end of Henderson, perhaps one of the more economically challenged parts of the community. And did a similar thing, similar facilitation. We were helped out. I don't know if Lieutenant Governor Elstrom was a part of that, but she certainly was Jacobsville and Glenwood. And these came up to be the 5 goals. So we wanted everything to be kid-centric, shaping early years 0 through college, being able to measure performance and achievement. It's not a matter of doing it. You have to know what you're doing, and measurements and evaluations and assessments are key towards doing any of this sort of work I should have mentioned. Neighborhood support, and then equipping them for life. So these are 5 attainable goals that the community wrapped itself around, that they wanted to see this area emerge. And from there, objectives and strategies were realized. And I document this in the book about both in Jacobsville and Engage Henderson is another project associated with Audubon Kids Zone, how test scores went up 50%, and you saw a lot more matriculation and better grades and better college admissions, acceptances, and I go into detail on that in the book as well. So this kind of brings this sort of whole of what comprehensive community development is all about. Yes?
Over what period of time did you see those benefits in terms of the testing stats?
Between the last, let's see, I finished in 21. They noticed some benefits within the first 3 years from 2018 to 2021.
Wow, that's
2018 to 2020, yeah. So I don't have anything past 2020, but yeah, it's, there was some noticeable, yeah.
That water's for you, just.
Okay, oh, thank you. Now, in this whole realm of community development, there's this other thing I touch upon called collective impact. And collective impact is distinct from community development in that it doesn't necessarily mean you're changing the physical, spatial, environmental situation, but it's about trying to achieve large-scale social impact. Think of the United Way. The United Way is collective impact because it wants to focus on how can we make a difference, how can we have an impact on the communities we serve and the communities we live in. And so collective impact, these authors are from Stanford of Social Innovation Review, and you have to have 6 conditions. You have to have a common agenda, a shared vision for change, shared measurements, you're measuring and understanding the same things, mutually reinforcing activities, so the activities connect and combine with each other, continuous communication, and then backbone support. So having a backbone support organization that can help bring these things together, that can help make a lot of this happen. And so there are these conditions for collective impact. As I said, there's a distinction between community development, but there's some overlap. You want that buzzing bee, that champion. But you have to have enough adequate financial resources, but there is a sense of urgency. There's a little bit of that fierce urgency of now that we need to change our community, or we need to change what's going on in our organization or whatever, and we need to do it now. This organization is a collective impact group. It's called Leadership Everyone. It used to be called Leadership Evansville. And they created a process. So in 2012, the new mayor at the time, who just finished 3 terms, Lloyd Winnicky, approached this organization about doing a visioning session for the community. And so this group, this thing, Voice, stands for Visioning Outcomes, Inspiring Community Engagement, created this process where people came together to kind of come up with their goals and their things that they were interested in. And part of this process, so they met with 32 sessions and 1,700 people. And part of the visioning was very deliberate and intentional. This Flower Man book I told you about, they had everybody read the book because it was about collective impact community development. But what can we do? The questions that were posed during these sessions were, what can we do to make our community better, but what can we do to leave the things that are negative about our community behind? So they asked these questions in all these sessions and put this word cloud together. And these are all the things that Evansville residents who participated in this process wanted to leave behind. All the negative things that make up. This made the news, but somebody had done this study, and Evansville, Indiana was the fattest city in the United States. Most obese city, and it bothered me. But there's lots of fast food joints everywhere, so, and public transportation is, you think TARC's bad. It's almost non-existent. But anyway, homelessness is a problem. And I have older discussions that have involved in the homeless research, and we sometimes seem to forget that homelessness affects all cities and all sizes. But the negativity, there's a lot of this, you know, and I'm not trying to, Evansville's a lovely place, but it has kind of been, having been in Louisville my whole life, and here you make comparisons, and it wasn't far off that, hey, if Louisville thinks it feels bad about itself, you know, people have it worse. And so there's a lot of people who have negative feelings about Evansville. Why do you want to come here? I got that when I was hired. Why are you here? Because I'm working at USI. And USI, I mean, that's a people are proud of that institution because it came from the people. So all of these things. And then they asked the question, what do you want to do to make your community better? So these are the things that came up. Friendliness, school system, greenway, libraries, safety. And so they created this process where opportunities were sort of there. Having, they wanted to have these engagement opportunities, greenways, specific sort of opportunities to work with the local enhancing the greenways, enhancing the parks, having experiences, having festivals, having things that bring people together. So that's sort of extremely important too. Okay? So a lot of these sort of things sort of came out of this process. Another collective impact thing was from this effort called the Promise Zone. So the Promise Zone is a HUD-funded federal program, a designation, if you will, that has been given to 22 communities, and Evansville received one of those. And this is the zone. It's the most impoverished areas of the community, areas here that are 30, 40, 50% poverty level. And so we received this designation in 2016 to be able to solve some critical problems around housing and healthcare and crime. And these zones, part of being in the designation is you get better position for federal grants and federal resources. And so one of the things we did is through consultants, we measured access to affordable housing. So we wanted to have, one of the goals was increasing affordable housing. And this is in the book, this might not be the best, maybe a little small, but we said, okay, we want to have a reduction in blighted properties. And this is within the first 4 years, first 3 years, no, 4 years. And we wanted to have more housing that's affordable, more permanent supportive housing for those that are working class, but others who might be on the fringes of losing housing. And we set these goals that we wanted mixed housing, permanent supportive housing, and affordable housing. And within 2 years, we met that goal. And we almost met that goal after 4 years. And we were about halfway there after the first 2-3 years. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of that, but this is a deliberate attempt to, within this area of the Promise Zone, to be that voice. So it follows those conditions. It's common agenda. We're all here to try to improve and enhance the quality of life. Shared understanding, shared measurements, having a backbone support organization. So in this case, the organization is called Echo Housing. And that's extremely significant because this is one of the two promise zones that was convened by an organization and not a city or municipality. So an organization took this upon themselves to be that backbone to help support this. So the city of Evansville didn't do that. I don't know the reasons why. Most communities, Indianapolis has a few actually, for which I think they do have one that maybe an organization do, but then the city itself has one. But you want that strong support. Okay. I'll finish up kind of last couple of themes of the book. One thing I also touch about when we talk about improving enhancing communities, we have to understand the role of housing. And to touch upon that a little bit with the role of affordable housing. But a lot of my dissertation research, was I worked with John Gildermill, was mentioned, was on the Hope 6 program. And Louisville has 3 Hope 6 projects. One of the very few communities to have had as multiple projects that we have. And Hope 6 stands for Housing Opportunities for People Everywhere. And this was created by Senate legislation, and I was actually championed by Jack Kemp, who was the HUD secretary during the George H.W. Bush administration. But a commission was convened to say that we have a terrible problem. 1 out of every 16 houses in America at the time are uninhabitable. That's a big deal. So we have to do something about it. So what Hope 6 did was a number of things. It changed the physical shape of public housing. So the Cotter and Lang homes in the West End, they were torn down to create new housing. Clarksdale, that became Liberty Green. And then the smoke areas around Shepherd Square became as well. And then Beecher Terrace, those that's not Hope 6, that was sort of a choice neighborhoods program, but it's sort of the same idea. So Louisville's had success of reimagining the physical shape of its housing for its most vulnerable and poorest. Still got a ways to go, as I've been seeing in the news a lot of the plight with Dosker Manor and a lot of the other kind of that needs to be fixed. But part of what this does is it helps reduce the concentration of poverty by taking out and reducing the concentration, but also providing supportive services and high standards and partnerships. So when you do housing, and I always sort of use this as sort of a mantra, and John Gildermill and I talk about this, you can't do housing without community development, but you can't do community development without housing either. So they come in hand. So you're trying to improve the enhance the quality of life, having a good housing stock, a livable and sustainable housing stock is extremely important. But it's not just the bricks and mortar. What Hope 6 brought to the equation was the community and supportive services necessary, this case management. So someone living in a Hope 6 unit who was qualified was able to have supportive services, have a case manager, have a social worker work with them. And that makes it where somebody can fulfill the goals and objectives of the organization. And then Hope 6 thrived on these public-private partnerships. And a lot of what Hope 6 used was this idea of new urbanism. So taking the old traditional urban form and creating community with a lot of that. Now with reimagining these Hope 6 communities in Louisville, that wasn't a stretch because they were in the urban core. But a lot of new urbanist planned communities have been outside an urban core. Norton Commons is an new urbanist concept. To kind of take Norton Commons and create that walkable traditional urban form. Some people look at new urbanism and say, oh, it's bourgeois, it's a little stated, it's artificial. But people living in these communities, and you can see that many of you probably been to Norton Commons or not, there's a lot of success there. A lot of people living and wanting to live in Norton Commons because they want this, especially individuals who are the older demographic of our society. But a lot of this sort of uses this new urbanism of, town center, the main street with buildings that are walkable, that are close to the curb, modest streets, a mix of residential and commercial throughout this footprint in the community. And so you see a little of that with these Hope 6 communities too, where you have at Liberty Green, you have Section 8 housing, you have those who have Section 8 vouchers or rents, and then you have market rate, where there are folks who are paying market rate for their units, living alongside those that are utilizing affordable housing vouchers. They're walkable, they're pedestrian friendly, they promote public transportation, they promote and foster the sense of community through new urbanism. Recreating that urban form that we've done, or maintaining that in the 3 Hope 6 projects and the Choice Neighborhood project that we just did with reimagining Beecher Terrace west of downtown a few years ago. So we didn't lose sight of that. We didn't upend the grid and create something without any kind of walkability. It would have been a shame if you're walking down Liberty or Muhammad Ali and some of these and, oh, I can't get there because there's a big field that doesn't allow me to travel through. That would have, but it kept it. This is Liberty Green. So you can see, this is the parking garage, parking deck. I think this is Ali. But these are the kinds of, and you see that because St. John Center's on the other side, that's that multi-use parking deck with the U of O Medical Center. And this is what's great about these sort of things. Now, here's some other examples of this along Ali. Liberty Green, this is the cover of the book. This is Liberty Green at twilight. Imagine it turned out great for this. Now, another project we worked on with Hope 6 that was in Newport, Kentucky. And Newport, south of Cincy. Many of you have probably been to Newport. Have you ever been to Newport on the Levee or all those sorts of exciting? Well, I'm glad you asked this question about, what's your name again?
Christian.
Christian asked me this question about Newport. You call it the vice capital. What is it? Well, a number of years ago, Newport was considered the vice capital of the South. It was lots of burlesque calls, lots of speakeasies, lots of prostitution. It was a vice city. And part of that, and this is an interesting other tidbit of this, is that you had a lot of, Kentucky's very good government, but you keep good government because you have good noble people of virtue who lead you and all this, but then you can't have those that don't. But one thing that made a lot of the corruption possible, in my estimation, was the fact that mayors and commissioners couldn't get, and public officials across the state couldn't be reelected. That's why we had one-term governors. It was in our Constitution. Mayors couldn't be reelected. That's why we had Harvey Sloan again, right? Harvey Sloan, then he stopped and became mayor again. Well, that was probably used to Newport's advantage, because think about that for a second. If you have a one-term mayor, you could slide in and out any kind of puppet politician you want to keep your corruption going. And that's what I suspect happened a lot of time in that. It changed in the 90s when the Constitution was changed to allow mayors and city commissioners to be reelected. And it just so happened about that time that Newport started a renaissance. How about that? You could stay in, yes, you get the corruption away, you get good government people, but yeah, there's a benefit of having someone long enough. Now, did it mean that, Louis wasn't corrupt, Louis didn't have the problem because we were doing it was difference of good, you could always have that, but I suspect Newport took advantage of that political culture and part of our climate that, hey, we can slot these people in. But even before the law was changed, by the 70s or 80s, Newport was seeing enough light, like we have to clean this town up. And there were a lot of reformers who brought in, but a lot of reformers were not, they might have been elected, but they weren't able to get a lot done. Until about the 90s, where you saw the revitalization of Newport with the levee, and some of this had to do with them getting a Newport Hope 6 grant. They were the smallest city ever to be awarded Hope 6. Newport has 17,000 people. But because of its location in the Cincinnati metropolitan area, it's important. So what Newport did is it took old public housing that bordered the levee on the river, tore the whole thing down, and scattered site all the public housing. Whereas Hope 6 would build the new housing, most of the projects builds the new housing on the same site as the old public housing. Newport did it differently and scattered it throughout the community. So this is Liberty Row, which is a little bit from downtown Newport, where you have a mixture of all these different kinds of homes. These two-story flats, some market rate, some home ownership, some rentals. This is the whole block of Liberty Street around the time, and this is dated. We're going back 15 plus years of the Hope 6 project. This is Corpus Christi Church. That closed that was converted into 20 units through low-income housing tax credits as a result of the Hope 6 program. So I love this church because you go in and that's the lobby of the old back of the church, where it's the meeting area. Come in and hey, so a lot of the closing of churches, you know, that's a great adaptive reuse of any kind of church, you know. Like, you know, tore down St. Barnabas. You know, that was, imagine if St. Barnabas, you know, talking about, imagine if St. Barnabas had been kept and you turned it into affordable housing. That'd be interesting. Especially with those weird kind of stained glass windows. But I always love this because within the units would butt up against the old stained glass. Really cool, really cool. And that's a cool thing about Hope 6. It isn't all, I should have prefaced it isn't all physically new homes. There were some rehabs that went on as well. And so a combination, but most of it is reimagining the whole situation. Now, that whole site that Hope 6 had in Newport, I haven't been to Cincinnati, Newport in a while, but it was still vacant as of a few years ago. But the plan was to have a $1 billion mixed-use development called Ovation. That was gonna be a mixture of everything. Office, retail, high-end apartments, all sort of things on that site because the land's available, but in a way that has deconcentrated poverty. When looking at Hope 6, I also looked at sort of social capital, and there were some interesting studies we looked at that there was a lot of mixed success in terms of economic mobility. There was a lot of great self-sufficiency. But one of the things that was hurting about Hope 6, like any kind of public housing, is you're being taken from a place where you lived. This is the thing we have to be careful about, that if we see somebody's poverty, oh, we gotta initiate some change, it has to be from the community themselves. Hope 6 didn't achieve that. Hope 6 was a federal program, and the federal program and the local powers that be, local elected leadership said, okay, we need to do this. And they worked with the federal government to make it possible. Better than not having it, but one of the things that, when studied about Hope 6, is you didn't see, a lot of residents found it difficult to meet new people. We noticed this in some studies that were done in Boston. Some studies were done, the evaluation by the social work department at U of L when they evaluated Liberty Green and the old Clarksdale, found, and I talk about this in the book, of the just folks not feeling like they're connected anymore. Didn't matter. That was home at Cotter and Lang Homes. That was my home in Clarksdale. And one criticism of Hope 6 has been that not all of them ever fulfilled what they call the one-to-one replacement requirement, meaning that according to the covenants that were set up, that you had to replace as many units as you tore down. Now, Newport actually added about 123 units throughout, and they scattered it because they didn't see it as on the same footprint as the old public housing. So I think one of the things, if you were to do and reimagine this, is, hey, maybe a more scattered site approach. If you're trying to take 300 units in a crowded public housing development, you tear it all down and you want to create new housing that has more square footage, is more livable, you're not going to fit the same 300 units in there. So this one-for-one requirement eventually was repealed by HUD, so they weren't sticking to it, and neither were the public housing authorities who got Hope 6. So that has been one of the criticisms of Hope 6 and limitations on that. Some of the studies, Michael Braisley, an architect here, did a study on the Park Duval Hope 6 and showed that mobility and access to services was very limited. That it didn't do anything or enhance connection to bus lines or any other kinds of transportation. He wrote a dissertation that I looked at, and he actually had a novel thing that if you join Hope 6, everybody gets a car. Well, I know it's sort of, but that was kind of the solution of, hey, how are people gonna get around? I mean, that's kind of cool, but you know, it obviously not an idea probably a lot of people paid attention to, but if you were to try to get over the mobility question, the self-sufficiency, that wasn't a bad idea. But that has been a concern. And then also another concern, if one of the tenets is to reduce the concentration of poverty, it's also reducing racial composition as well. So the thing was, if you have concentration of poverty and a lot of people who are poor, happen to be predominantly minority African American, the studies with Hope 6 and Park Duval and others didn't show any deconcentration no racial deconcentration occurred. that it was the same kind of still segregated setup. So that's another sort of criticism, that the lack of this sort of integration was sort of a challenge for some of them. Okay? So I'll talk a little bit more, I'll sort of wrap this up in a little bit about the last sort of thing I talk about is place. So if we're trying to reimagine communities, we have to understand place. And place is we talk about not just, you know, it could be virtual, it could be spatial, it could be physical. But place in our cases encompasses a location. But what's important is separating it from space is a place has purpose, meaning, and identity. So we are in a place because this is the repository of records of law for our community. It's a place. It's more than just a space. It has a meaning, purpose, and identity. Place matters. People move to a community because of place. They move to New Lou because it's a cool place. They move to the Highlands because it's a cool place. Wonderful things are happening. And oftentimes this happens through a process called placemaking. It concerns the deliberate shaping of an environment to facilitate social interaction and improve a quality of life. So it's these sort of physical sort of activities that go on, and how do we make place? And I'll give some sort of quick examples. So you can transform a place to be an authentic expression of oneself. A group called Project for Public Spaces does this different kind of various levels of placemaking. So we can have placemaking that is large scale over a long period of time. They could be adaptive reuse of old abandoned buildings. So a lot of, if you take an abandoned building and making it a place where it's you know, a lot of the art studios and residential commercial sites. We've seen this around our community, this kind of standard placemaking where we take something, we adapt or reuse the building, and we make place of it. So they can be a long period of time, they can be a short period of time. You can have strategic placemaking where you're able to attract businesses and offer amenities. So strategic placemaking would be probably like a New Lou. So the standard is, okay, you're gonna take a place and make it, transform it. But a place over time is more strategic placemaking, right? So the community is transformed. You're attracting a creative class of workers. And I talk a lot about the creative class as a group that want to be a place, they want to be where the places are cool and hip, right? They want to be in the Highlands, they want to be in New Lou. They don't want to be in some square, they don't want to be in some place where they don't get to realize that potential. And so communities engage in that standard placemaking where we create a physical space new, a strategic sort of approach. Creative placemaking is another one where we involve all sectors of the community and we integrate arts and culture. So we integrate this sort of character of arts and culture into kind of the physical and social character. So we build this social capital by identifying assets, and we work with the relationship with the community in identifying. So arts and cultural venues are often created out of creative placemaking, and it involves all different people from all different sectors of our community. So this is a place called Haney's Corner. It's the Arts District in Evansville. And there's a lot of creative placemaking. A lot of organizations are here. And this is a first Friday we do where all the different assets are coming together, and you got a brew pub, you got an art gallery, you got a pub, you got a nice restaurant. You have all these sorts of comings together to create an exciting sort of era. There's a theater nearby called the Alhambra. Isn't a functioning theater right now, but the space is used to engage in all these activities. And the last one I'll talk about is tactical placemaking. So these are very low cost, short term, ranging from pop-ups, demonstration, pilot projects. So do-it-yourself urbanism. So it's very temporary. The late Brendan Clayco, maybe some of you have heard of him. He was kind of Louisville's big urbanist. Kind of used this as sort of wresting the control of the streets from the firm grip of the automobile and create more valuable public space experiences. So a lot of tactical placemaking may involve having a place outside a storefront, and you move the cars and you convert it into a green space. like they did on West Main Street a couple of years ago. Just took the area and built a table and built some benches, and this is how we make plays, right there. They did that outside the Urban Design Studio downtown, just where that is over on 3rd Street. Pat Puma is a friend who runs that. He moved the cars and they created a little garden out there. That's tactical placemaking. You're reimagining the place in a very short, deliberate, intentional. It's not a grand, sort of strategic, it's not creative, and it's not your standard taking a physical form and transforming it. This is sort of cool. Another tactical, this was the Igloo project in Covington. So they just put this here, and what's cool about this is people can write messages for other people. They can use this as a way of communicating with the public. It's really cool as a way of sort of being a shelter, and it's neat because there's some benches there, so you can commune and you can write and you can have fun on a nice spring summer day in Covington. This is one maybe some of you have seen. This is tactical placemaking. This is Cyclovia. This is that effort they did a few years ago. Anybody ever do that on Bardstown Road? Did you do that? That's tactical placemaking, man. That's where they take Bardstown Road, and Tom Owen kind of inspired this a little bit as our historical and Viking Pied Piper, if you will, where they closed on a Sunday afternoon for 3 or 4 hours, and you can just you can build community. You do it in a sort of free, open way. Very short term, but a great kind of example of tactical placemaking. How do we know placemakings work? When we see buy-in, when we see housing being built, when we see adaptive reuse, when we improve quality of life indicators, when we see good schools infrastructure, low crime, when we see better housing, building social capital, when we see communities improving, we know placemaking is working. People want places where they can live and thrive. Place matters. Placemaking matters. Community development matters. Social capital matters. It's extremely important because how we look at place, how we look at community has been disrupted. It's been re-identified. COVID changed a lot of how we think of place and placemaking and how we think of our communities, but it matters. And it requires all of us to get together. Everybody can contribute to making place. How will you make your place? Thank you. Sorry if I went
We have
too
time
long.
for questions.
Sorry if I went too long.
Anybody have a question or anything?
I think Mr. Smith wants to make an announcement.
Mr. Smith? Yes.